Good afternoon. This is Debbie West and Michael Hathaway, hosts of Lost Knowledge on Revolution Radio. We air every Saturday at 2 p.m. Central Time. Michael, how are you today?
I am fine and excited about the program.
Yes, really exciting. So let me introduce our guest. Our guest today is Dr. Stanley Krippner. He has a Ph.D. from Northwestern University, a B.S. From the University of Wisconsin, and he is currently the professor of psychology at Saybrook University, which he's been there since, I believe, 1972. He's a fellow at 4 APA divisions, which is the association. Yes, he'll have to tell us what that is, actually.
American Psychological Association.
That was on the tip of my tongue, and I couldn't get it out. Thank you so much, Dr. Krippner. Let me go on here because his bio itself could take up half the show, but I'm going to summarize it for a minute. He was the director of Kent State University Child Study Center and a medical dream research laboratory in New York. He's the author of over 40 books, at least, and they begin to unravel the mysteries of neuroscience here in the modern era. We're going to talk to him today about a book called Rolling Thunder, The Shamanic Powers of Rolling Thunder. And he wrote this book with Sidian Morning Star Jones, who I think, if you can help me with that, is the son of Rolling Thunder. So we're going to welcome...
Grandson.
Grandson, great. So we're going to welcome Dr. Stanley Krippner to today's show. We're so excited to have you, and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for that very elaborate introduction.
Well, there's so much more I could say. I mean, literally, you have amazing background in so many things. And we'll try to...
But I've lived a long time. As Katharine Hepburn once said, upon accepting her 4th Academy Award, if you live long enough, anything can happen.
Well, you have covered some really interesting ground, and we want to get into that because things have been starting to shift in the field that you've been in, and we'd like to hear a little bit of your views on that. The science of the mind is an area that is just starting to get more and more unraveled. I think the more we seek out information, the more questions are left unanswered.
That's a good way to put it.
So, well, let's start out real quick and talk about this book that just came out on the shamanic powers of Rolling Thunder. How did you get involved in that book, and what can you tell us about this amazing person, Rolling Thunder?
Well, back in the 1960s, I got to know members of the Grateful Dead rock band, and one of the drummers, Mickey Hart, kept telling me that I must meet Rolling Thunder, a medicine man from Nevada. And I said, I simply don't know when I'm going to get to Nevada. And so Mickey put Rolling Thunder on a private plane and brought him to California to meet me. And Rolling Thunder and I had a exciting and very interesting and actually very close relationship for some 20 years before he passed on.
So tell us about shamanism. You've written a lot of books about it, and we have done actually the last 6 or 7 shows on people who are either modern day shamans or studying Norse shamanism, a wide variety of different people who have an interest in the field of shamanism. One of your books is demystifying the concept of shamanism. Can you talk a little bit about it, because it is something that I think people are starting to become more interested in?
Oh yes, I'll be happy to. We chose the title "Demystifying Shamans in Their World" because what shamans do can be put into anthropological and psychological frameworks. And there's nothing really mystifying about shamans because they're practitioners. They go to work, they do things, they help their community, and they've been around for a long time. They've been around 40 or 50,000 years. many people today who call themselves shamans really don't deserve the term because they have not done an apprenticeship and they don't have a community. To be a shaman, you have to be given that title, whatever it translates into in whatever language they live in. You have to be given that title by your community. Without a community, you can't call yourselves a shaman. Rolling Thunder actually had a community by the name of Metatante that he organized with money given him by the Grateful Dead. He bought a plot of land in Nevada, and for many, many years, it was a spiritual community. People came from all over the world to live there and to learn Native American ways. They came there for healings, came there for teachings, and it's one of the topics that we feature in our book. I personally had been to Metatante during its existence, had many educational and inspirational and actually comical experiences there.
So when the shaman works, they go, I think, into other worlds that are through their consciousness. This is something that people are starting to pay attention to now in terms of even modern, neuroscience professors. We interviewed Dr. Eben Alexander on this show when he talked about the reality of consciousness and its existence being a big force in the universe. Can you talk a little bit about that from a shamanistic perspective and also from your own experience?
Well, yes, I'm glad you had Eben Alexander on the show. He's a good friend of mine, and of course his background as a neurosurgeon makes him eminently qualified to speak about the unusual experiences he had. Actually, his experience was what we call a near-death experience. Many shamans relate these experiences also, and there are different parts of the brain that are extremely active during near-death experiences. However, people like Dr. Alexander and myself would say that the near-death experience is not limited to the brain, that it actually goes beyond what the brain is capable of doing, and that's where we get into these other dimensions of existence, what the shamans call the upper world, the lower world. And shamans have the ability to travel back and forth and up and down voluntarily and at their will. This is one of the unique things about shamanism because these people are very skilled and disciplined practitioners, and they can direct their consciousness in many different ways. However, the actual authentic shamans always do this in the benefit of their community. They don't do it to be famous. They don't do it to earn money. They don't do it to have sex with their clients like some practitioners do. They're, at their best, they're very altruistic and are trying to help the people who have come to them for assistance.
Mm-hmm. Let's switch gears for a minute and talk a little bit about dreams, because you've written so many papers and presented all over the world. In fact, you've been awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Association for the Study of Dreams. You've written 2 books, I think, or more. I highlighted Dreamscaping, New Techniques to Understand Yourself and Others, and Perchance to Dream, The Frontiers of Dream Psychology. What is it about dreams? What can you help us understand about dreams that can help us learn a little bit more about these different states of consciousness and how they affect our lives?
Well, Rolling Thunder was very much attuned to dreams, and he would spend considerable amounts of time talking to people in Metatante, his spiritual community, about their dreams, because he thought that sometimes dreams can take us to other dimensions of existence. When you dream, you're not really bound by the frameworks of time and space that you are bound by in waking life in your culture. In waking life, time is like an arrow, and we have past, present, and future. But in dreams, you might jump into the future, you might go back to the past. That arrow is non-existent. Time is all jumbled up. We have what some people call deep time. And space is also jumbled up. You don't end where your skin ends. Many Native American tribes had what they call the long body. You, as a person, extend beyond your skin. You extend into your family, your relatives. All of our relations, as a Native American concept, means that you extend into the world of the animals, the birds, the fish, even into the forests and the mountains and the rivers and the air. And so this is why Rolling Thunder and other Native American leaders have been very strong on ecology, on preserving the land, the natural resources, and not exploiting them. A very, very different point of view than the European invaders who came and actually exploited the land and set the stage for the ecological crisis that we're faced with today.
So, if time is not linear and the continuum of time is maybe multidimensional, how does that help us understand ourselves? Doesn't that make life a little bit more complicated?
Life is pretty complicated the way it is, and many of us have trouble navigating our world given the cultural constraints that we're faced with. But once you get into the shaman's world, yes, things are both more complicated and they're more simple. They're more simple in the sense that shamans simply align themselves with nature and go wherever nature will direct them. They're more complicated when people try to make an explanation, as when Rolling Thunder was challenged by a newspaper reporter. We mentioned this in our book, and the newspaper reporter said, do something that I can write about, and within the hour, Rolling Thunder got to work, and there was a big thunderstorm. They hadn't had a thunderstorm in ages in that particular community. But there was a thunderstorm after Rolling Thunder was challenged, and believe it or not, the newspaper reporter wouldn't even write it up. He was afraid that people wouldn't believe him and he'd lose his credentials. And this is what typically happens. Shamans can do some remarkable things, and doctors will not believe that somebody's been healed. Newspaper reporters will not believe something that they've seen with their own eyes. And many religious leaders will say, well, that's demonic, that's the work of the devil. So shamans have a pretty complicated time navigating their way through the stereotypes and the limitations put upon them by the so-called civilized culture in which now most of them live. Every once in a while, there's a sympathetic person who is able to vouch for what the shamans are doing. And so I would say that shamans now have a much better reputation. They're taken much more seriously than they were some 50 years ago when I first became interested in this topic.
What started you on this journey in the first place? What was your first, say, paranormal experience that really opened up this whole doorway?
Well, I grew up on a farm in the state of Wisconsin, and when my father plowed the land, he was digging up occasional Indian arrowheads. And so there was actually an Indian mound on our farm, and that started me to read about the Native American tribes that used to live in that area. And one of the tribes was the Potawatomi tribe, and I also found out there were Potawatomi Indians on the East Coast. And upon further investigation, I found out that the medicines that the tribe used were actually much more effective than the medicines that the Europeans brought with them. And the same can be said of many other Native American tribes, that the healing herbs that they had, the rituals that they used, were much more effective than the Europeans' attempts at healing and their practice of bleeding people to remove the negative humors from the body and other superstitious beliefs that they had, which were really not aligned with nature. And whenever they did use herbal substances, it was sort of accidental, like when they used foxglove, which later was found out to contain herbs that we call digitalis. But those were few and far between. Native Americans had a very, very well described and defined pharmacopoeia that now is becoming and being taken much more seriously than it was when the Europeans first came to America. You ask about my first unusual experience. My family didn't have much money, and I wanted to buy a set of encyclopedia, which cost $100, and I was trying to find out who I could possibly borrow $100 from, and I was in my room, and I had an inspiration. My Uncle Max was the only rich person in our family, and I thought, oh, I'll ask Uncle Max. And at that very moment, we had a phone call downstairs, and my mother was breaking out crying, and indeed her brother-in-law had just died of a massive heart attack, and it was my Uncle Max. So that came as quite a surprise to me, and it's something that I didn't even mention for years, but I did make a record of it, and now I talk about it, and I've written about it several times. So one thing sort of led to another, and I began to take these experiences seriously.
Did you wind up with $100 for the encyclopedia?
No, I never bought an encyclopedia. I still don't have a set of encyclopedia today, but now I don't need one because everything you would ever want to get would be on the Internet.
You're right there. Deb, I don't want to take your time.
Oh, no, it's fine, Michael. Totally fine. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the work that you've done internationally, because you've spoken and published papers and received many distinguished awards from all over the world, including Brazil, India, China, Spain, Russia. A lot of people feel like right now is a really important time in Earth's history, and that there's a lot going on with some cosmic alignments and our shift in consciousness. What do you think about that? Have you heard about that? And worldwide, do you think there is something going on as far as the advancement of our species?
Well, I think that this is a very important question. Just yesterday, I did a video for the celebration of the Chinese New Year, and they said they wanted a 2-minute greeting. So what I thought would be appropriate is to remind them that the new year in China is the year of the fire rooster, and the fire rooster only comes every 50 years. And I said, this is appropriate because you think of fire, you think of flames, you think of the sun. And when you think of the sun, you think of solar energy. At least I think of solar energy. And this year, China is devoting $100 billion to the development of solar energy, much more than any other country, including the United States. So this, I think, is the future. Renewable sources of energy, such as sun power, such as wind power, such as water power. And the era of the fossil fuels is waning. It's not going to be as important in the future as it once was. And attempts to resurrect it and keep it alive are pretty much in vain, because solar power can be so much cheaper, so much more effective, and it's something that's available much more easily, and I'm glad that China is sort of leading the way. This is just one sign of the massive changes that are taking place for the better. And of course, there are many signs that are just the opposite. Things are getting worse, with the fundamentalistic religions fighting each other over their interpretation of God and what's right and what's wrong. And this is not spiritual, this is not religious at all. It's against unity, it's against the oneness that we all experience. This is holding us back. So is humanity going to survive? Is it going to get on top of global warming and climate change and have a more brilliant future, or is it going to get bogged down in selfish interests and religious wars and other misadventures that are potentially harming the species. Rolling Thunder foresaw the climate problems 50 years ago, and when I met him, this is one of the topics he was talking about. And again, in our book, The Shamanic Powers of Rolling Thunder, we use some of his words to show how far-sighted he was and how he saw all of these problems coming on.
And so what do you think? Is there a grand design out there in the universe, something that we connect to beyond ourselves?
I think that humans make their own grand design, to tell you the truth. I think that there are great mysteries in this world, and if we align ourselves with nature, we'll be on top of the mysteries. If we fight nature and divorce ourselves from nature, we'll be on the bottom end of the mysteries. So let's use what little volition we have, what little decision-making power we have, to be on the right side and be on the side of living beings, both human and non-human, and be on the side of whatever nature brings our way.
So let me talk for a minute about alternative therapies in health and medicine, because you're on an advisory board for that, and you did mention it earlier. There's been a big influx in Western medicine to use things like starting with acupuncture and then going into some other less well-known modalities like reflexology, I think they call it craniosacral. There's just a huge list of alternative practices now that people have started to spend money on. In fact, billions of dollars on alternative therapies. Where do you see that having a place in society? Or has Western medicine got it all wrong, especially in the fields of, say, psychology, in particular with children? And what can
good heavens, no. Western medicine doesn't have it all wrong. Western medicine has done a lot of positive things. I think that where Western medicine goes wrong is when they think that you can prescribe a drug for every ailment, including emotional and mental ailments, where non-invasive therapies, such as very good psychotherapy, such as community support, and even well-designed herbal medicines, exercise, proper eating, proper breathing, proper meditation can be much more effective. The literature is filled with this, and I don't think that there's any need to talk about so many alternative types of medicine. For me, there's either good medicine or bad medicine. There's medicine that works, there's medicine that doesn't work. And we now have enough research studies showing that for some types of ailments, acupuncture does work. For some types of ailment, craniosacral therapy does work. You just have to suit the technique to the ailment and to the person. Some people respond, some people don't. One of the major problems that we have in mental illness is bipolar conditions and severe depression. And the pharmaceutical companies have made billions of dollars through their drugs. But hypnosis and suggestion and psychotherapy work just as well, if not better, with none of the side effects that the pharmaceutical drugs are prescribing for these ailments. Sometimes they can be used in combination, of course, but to rely only on medication for any of the types of disorders and challenges we've been talking about, again, is to ignore nature, is to ignore more natural, more community-oriented, more, shall we say, emotionally sensitive and mentally sensitive means of self-control and self-regulation to get on top of challenges when they come our way.
Yeah, so many people think right now, educators have said that children are overstimulated and that the age of electronics has created, just an impossible field for them to be able to function, for their chakras to be aligned properly. It's just too stimulating.
Children certainly have a great deal of stimulation that they didn't have when I was growing up 70 years ago. And a lot of children simply cannot handle this, and this is a challenge for parents. I think that parents have to regulate the amount of time that children spend on video games, on the computer, on electronic apps. They have to make sure that children spend face-to-face time with friends rather than communicating with their friends only through electronic media. Children need to be outdoors. They need to have contact with nature. They need to have time, what we call downtime, to relax. They need family time. This is a challenge for today's parents. And if parents are neglecting this, the children will run off into their own separate universes. We're talking about the shamanic universes. Children's universes are much different because they get caught up in the electronic media and they do become overstimulated by one thing or another. And this is not good for their brains. The right type of stimulation is very good for their brains, a stimulation that helps them to solve problems, that helps them to make connections, to interact with their peers, to enjoy play, to enjoy free time, to enjoy spontaneous activities that are not overregulated. So yes, you've hit on a very, very important topic, and I hope that all of the parents listening to the show will take this to heart and will make sure that their children have good nutrition, good playtime, good friends, and good parenting. And also that they make spiritual connections with nature and with the unseen forces of the universe.
How do you, I mean, you've been around psychology for so long. What do you feel is causing this onset of autism and ADHD and all the other conditions that are hitting today's children? I think it's something like 1 in every 10 children are afflicted. How is this happening and why?
To tell you the truth, these problems have always been with us. But drug companies have now jumped on these problems and they say, oh yes, these children have deficit disorders in their attention. Well, we have just the drug that can help them out. And so instead of better education, instead of customizing education to the children so that they're able to surmount these challenges to learning, they take a drug like Ritalin or even something stronger than Ritalin that supposedly help them concentrate. So what we call big pharma is making billions from medicating these children, and in many cases over-medicating them. You talk about overstimulation. Well, sometimes the drugs that are prescribed by pharmacists and physicians are exaggerating this overstimulation. I think that one of the problems here is also diet. Yes, 1 out of 10 children supposedly have ADHD. 1 out of 3 children is obese, overweight. That's even more of a danger, and that's because they do not have enough exercise, they do not have good food, they do not have proper eating habits. And Michelle Obama, the outgoing First Lady, planted a garden and tried to get more vegetables into school lunches, and she was made fun of for doing this. But she had it all right. She was very upset by the obesity epidemic among children, and even though that has gone down slightly, it still remains as a challenge. And I think this again is a task for parents to watch their children's diet and make sure that they eat healthy foods that do not put on unwanted pounds. And again, children who get physical exercise are much more likely to have proper weight than children who sit around and play with computer games and put on the pounds instead of taking the pounds off.
Yeah, many years ago.
Again, I'm not against computer games. In their place, they can be very helpful, and they can actually develop a lot of neurological circuits in the child's brain. It's just that, like anything, too much of a good thing can create problems.
Many years ago when I was in school, a treatment of choice for attention deficit was a good stiff ruler. That's what got people back on course and paying attention. I'm joking.
I remember those days too. You bet.
That's right. I call a lot of that attention positive rather than attention deficit. And my theory behind this, which you can, you may tell me I'm way off the mark, is the fact that out of our five senses, seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling, one of those senses may be a lot stronger than the others. And so it's drawing the attention away from the subject by what's going on. Like really good hearing, if there was any sound, all of a sudden the person is drawn to the sound rather than focusing.
I think that the word focusing is very important. Yes, if you become passive, you're drawn to the sound or the external stimulus, and you don't have the power to regulate and to just assimilate it properly as you would any other experience. This is the wonderful thing about meditation, because meditation is basically self-control. It's regulating one's attention, and when one learns how to regulate one's attention, one can direct attention and consciousness to what will produce balance in one's life, what will produce joy and enrichment in one's life.
Well, I grew up not knowing my own mind until I studied neurolinguistics, and I determined afterwards that actually in recall in my mind's eye, I do not recall in 4.5 of the five senses. So the way that I approached the world was so far off from everyone else that I just somehow learned how to learn, and I just didn't give myself any credit for knowing. I knew I was fooling people. Now I know that whatever I do, I may not explain it, but at least I trust it.
Well, there you are. That's a very useful anecdote, and I think your listeners can learn a great deal from that. And when I visited Ruling Center at Metatanti, I found out that at his spiritual community, he didn't even have television. He thought that the children would get much more out of life by playing outdoors, by communing with animals, because there were certainly many, many animals at Metatanti, as well as the chickens in the chicken coop, and also by telling stories. He said, why do you need television? You can tell each other stories, and we have visitors from all over the world who can tell stories. Well, I think that was a little bit extreme, but it certainly worked for the children who were there at the time, and the ones who are now adults have very, very vivid memories of how they learned Native American stories and also stories from other parts of the world, because Rolling Thunder had visitors from Europe and from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America. All of them brought their own stories with them. Storytelling is sort of a disappearing talent, and that really shouldn't be, because human beings are storytelling species, and the ability to tell stories and to listen to stories is an important part of our evolution, an important part of our heritage.
What was Rolling Thunder's predominant talent?
I think that the predominant path for Rolling Thunder was aligning himself with nature. And one of my vivid memories of Rolling Thunder is when I was visiting Metatanti, his spiritual community, and one night he beckoned me to come with him to the very edge of the property, where the property ended, where a forest began, and he started hooting. And he started hooting, a pack of coyote came out of the forest. And he hooted back and forth with the leader of the pack, and the leader of the pack came right up to us, so close that I could have reached out and touched him. And after a little hooting, the coyote went back into the woods, and I said, Rolling Thunder, what's that all about? And Rolling Thunder said, well, we have to renew our treaty every now and then. We have an agreement that we won't hunt down and kill the coyote, and in return they will not raid our chicken coops and eat up our chickens. And he said the other farmers around here shoot the coyotes because the coyotes come in and eat up their chickens. Well, we've never had that problem with any of our chickens. And that's because we have this agreement with the coyote. We leave them alone, they'll leave us alone. So that's a good example of being close to nature, not pushing oneself onto nature or trying to dominate nature. So in addition to his alignment with the rain and with thunder, which is how he got his name, he was also very, very close to the animals, the birds, the mountains, the streams. He wanted to preserve all of this as closely and as best he could.
Do you think it's possible to commune with the spirits, the energies that have gone before us on the land? I know that you talk about the three tenses of time, the past, the future, and the present.
Well, Rolling Thunder, of course, believed that he was able to do this, and he actually claimed that he could remember 2 or 3 of his past lives, all of which he spent in different other Native American tribes. And he would occasionally talk to spirits from those times. So in my work with Brazilian mediums, I've sat in on many sessions, what we call seances, where they have talked with spirits. And whether these spirits are discarnate entities, in other words, deceased people, whether they're a product of one's own imagination, well, that's open to discussion and debate, but nonetheless, these are serious people, and these are people who are doing what they do for the benefit of folks who have come to them for help. I recently published a paper about a Native American Army chaplain and a woman who worked for the Army planning social events. And she would have dreams in which soldiers who were killed in Iraq or Afghanistan would come to her in her dreams and give her information that she would then check out with the chaplain she worked with. And he would say, oh, yes, I knew him back in Afghanistan when I was there. And they would check the records, and the identification of the soldier could be verified. The soldier would come up with enough information about the company that he served in or the location that he was in so that this could be verified. Now, she asked, why are you coming in my dreams? Why don't you come in the chaplain's dreams? And they said, well, you know, he's a Native American, and he had a grandfather who was a shaman, but for some reason or another, he's not as receptive as you are. We have to come through you, and then you have to check things out with him. So whether or not this was a complete fabrication, or whether or not these spirits are really coming through, is a matter of controversy, but I think you can really make a good case that these spirits were coming through her dreams. And why were they coming through? They wanted to assure the relatives that were in mourning for them that they were on the other side and that they'd be there waiting, and that they shouldn't do much time grieving because they were having a happy time where they were. So before the chaplain moved away and went overseas, we got a collection of 12 dreams, and those are all well verified and well developed, and people can take with them what they want. But that's my latest experience in terms of the communications that you're talking about.
It's fascinating. I've had a metaphysical discussion group for 22 years, and my teachers are all the people that have showed up over that period of time. And I just shake my head in amazement of the stories that I hear.
Oh, I bet you did, sure.
Now, in the process of that, let's talk trance states for a minute. And there are so many different levels of trance and so much information that's coming through. And like these premonitions or connections to the past, what is the source for that? As you say, it may or may not be real, but how do we learn to trust that?
I think that trust is a very good issue, and the experience with the dreams I just told you about, that's all written up in a journal called the Journal of Near-Death Studies. And everything that I do with the unusual people that I run into, I do write up. I think that it's doing them justice to put their stories on record, and then the readers can make of this what they will. And always we have to put in the issue of trust. What happens if this is a hoax? What happens if this is a segment of poor memory? What happens if the person is really schizophrenic and is imagining these things? Well, this is why verification is so important. As Ronald Reagan said when he was negotiating nuclear treaties, yes, trust but verify. The same thing goes with psychical research. Yes, you can trust what people tell you, but you also have to verify it, and there are certainly ways of verification that parapsychologists have developed over the years. I think another way of verifying it, especially when it comes to healing, find out who's worked with the healer before, who's worked with the shaman before. What's the track record? Talk to people on their client list and get an impression before you invest time and money into going to a healer for healing, going to a medium for contact with the departed loved one, or anybody who claims to have some special abilities and who is going to take your time and take your money for it. Trust but verify.
That's well said. As a sidebar, I live about 5 miles from William James' summer home.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I knew a woman that actually was a relative of his that had been connected to Edgar Cayce, and it's just, this whole thing is just so fascinating to me.
Well, that's remarkable. Of course, Edgar Cayce was before my time, but I knew his son and I know his grandson, and they do a considerable amount of research at the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. They have a marvelous library. They are doing their best to investigate some of the remedies that Edgar Cayce put forward and find out if they do indeed have healing properties. And again, Cayce was really one of the first people who talked about mind-body medicine, and this holistic point of view is now becoming very popular in health circles, but I can't think of very many people before Edgar Cayce who had that concept of having the mind and the body work together for healing. Another person who was ahead of his time.
I've been a member of the association for quite a few years, and again, I agree. I interviewed Kevin Tedeschi, and Kevin had actually read a book on Bridie Murphy and then a newspaper article on the woman, and told his father at 15 that he was going to move to Virginia Beach and become the head of the ARE, which he eventually did.
Well, that's quite remarkable.
Just another little sidebar that fits into that. So do you get a lot of dreams yourself that guide you?
Oh, good heavens, yes. I remember dreams just about every morning, and I'm constantly looking at my dreams to see what I can learn from them. And I had a dream just last night about being in a jail, and that really stimulated me to look at what parts of my life are imprisoning me and are sort of keeping me in a jail and restricting my freedom of movement. So that was a very, very profitable dream.
I hope it wasn't this radio show.
Oh, good heavens.
Oh, just kidding.
I think that you raise a very important point, and your listeners can actually look up some of the books I've written about dreams, most notably the book called Extraordinary Dreams, in which I and my co-authors talk about dreams about the future, dreams about past lives, lucid dreams, dreams about contact with somebody at a distance, creativity dreams. There are many, many types of extraordinary dreams that people could really benefit from if they would remember their dreams and if they would work with their dreams. I'm a member, as you said earlier, of the International Association for the Study of Dreams, and we are having our annual convention in Southern California this summer, and people can look up our website, ASDREAMS, and they can get all the information about our conferences, which are not only the annual conference, but the regional conferences. And many people at these conferences do exactly what you've talked about, exploring dreams for meaning and for direction in our lives. Not all dreams give this information. Some dreams are simply helping us to remember what we've done during the day, are helping us to work through our emotions, are helping us to solve problems. But dreams do serve a very important function, whether we remember them or not.
I had a chance to write on lucid dreams a few years ago, do a book, and I came to the conclusion, hypnosis being my field, that we can create lucid dream trances where we can go into it in like a meditative trance state and manipulate thoughts and actually experience different things.
Well, again, you certainly were on the cutting edge of what's happening right now. More and more attention is being paid to lucid dreams than ever before. Different friends of mine like Robert Wagner, Jane Gackenbach, and many, many others, Ryan Hurd, have not only written books on lucid dreams, but they've developed internet courses that you can access on the computer and learn how to dream lucidly, how to make use of your lucid dreams. Also, there's been considerable research done showing how the brain changes during a lucid dream. And so this is an area of study which is getting much more attention now than it has in the past. Even though if you go back several thousand years, you'll find out the Tibetan monks had a practice called dreaming in the clear light. And they had a special type of meditation that they did to induce a lucid dream. And then when they did realize that they were dreaming, they would do a special type of meditation for their own spiritual development. There might be one or two of your listeners who does not know what a lucid dream is, so let me just explain to you folks. When you have a lucid dream, you're fast asleep, but you're aware that you are dreaming. And you can, in some cases, start to direct the dream and take the dream into any direction that you want to take it. But it's quite a remarkable experience to be awake and aware while you're having a very, very vivid dream.
Do you think that life experiences like a near-death experience can change your mind's sensitivity so that your senses actually
near-death
become more
experiences
sensitive?
can certainly change somebody's life. There have been any number of studies. PMH Atwater, your reader might look up her work, Atwater. She's done the most intensive studies on how near-death experiences can change somebody's life, usually for the better. And one experience can't really change the brain, but if you engage in a practice long enough, your brain can change. Meditation can change the brain, for example. Psychotherapy can change the brain. Any type of disciplined mind control, any type of disciplined self-regulation can change the brain, and can often change it very rapidly within a few weeks if you keep it up, and can change the brain for the better in terms of harmonizing different parts of the brain, helping the brain to work together, and therefore leading to a better integrated life while we're awake.
What would you like to mention in this interview that probably I haven't asked questions about? What would you like to enlighten the listeners with?
Well, you've been very comprehensive, and I think that while we're talking about changing the brain, I'll tell you one of my concerns, and that's people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, what we call PTSD, because their brains have been changed for the worse. They have not been able to function. They have nightmares. They can't hold down a steady job. Many of them can't have a decent relationship, and their brains really need to be changed. And I've written 3 books with co-authors on PTSD that your readers can look up. And I think one of the keys to changing their lives is to focus on their nightmares and become lucid in their nightmares and change the nightmares. Once you change the nightmares, you're able to work those emotions through the brain and through the body, and that will start to treat and solve the problem with the PTSD, whether it's the result of a combat experience, whether it's the result of an accident or sexual molestation or whatever brought out the trauma. The PTSD nightmare is stuck, and the person's life is stuck, and we have to get them unstuck, and there are good therapeutic ways of doing this, and one of them is to focus on the nightmare and help them change that nightmare into an ordinary, scary dream. Scary dreams are good for you, by the way. They help to work emotions through the system. But the PTSD nightmare can't do that. It's stuck. We've got to get them to put those experiences into symbols and metaphors. You can use art therapy, you can use dance therapy, you can use drawing, you can use singing, you can use music, you can use humor. Anything to get the person unstuck. And this is a problem that's facing many, many people, not only veterans, but people who have other types of trauma. And I think that this is one of the big challenges that we have, that some of the cutting-edge techniques that we've been talking about, like meditation, like lucid dreaming, like acupuncture, like better diet, and even play and socializing can be very, very useful in helping countless numbers of people work through the PTSD and get them unstuck.
That's great. That's kind of what I was alluding to in what I call a lucid dream trance, the ability to change.
Well, you're absolutely right, because this is an example of where lucid dreams can help make a change in the brain. When you work with PTSD, you have to change the brain, you have to change the beliefs, you have to change the behavior. Many people have these strange beliefs. Oh, I'm responsible for my buddy getting killed. Oh, I'm responsible for that guy that raped me. Oh, I'm responsible for all the kids who were killed in that accident at school. No, that's ridiculous. These things happen. The world is often a dangerous place, and people have to change those irrational beliefs. And once they change the belief, and once they change the brain, they can change their behavior, and they can live happier and more joyous lives.
We're down to a couple of 2-3 minutes left. The music will sort of cut us off when we hear it. How can people get in touch with you, and what is next for you as the music plays us out?
I think that I would recommend that people simply look at my website, which is stanleykrippner.weebly.